Okay. Mike LaRusso, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for doing this. Much appreciated. You are the author of the Sales Professional Survival Guide, a blueprint for tactical prospecting. It's a book that has come about, as I understand it, from your 40 years of experience as a sales consultant, which
hurts when I hear that.
which encompasses a broad variety of sales experiences, everything from creating analytical sales models to pounding the pavement, but has resulted in a formalized prospecting methodology specifically designed to gain new sales opportunities. I know you spent a lot of time speaking to sales teams and helping them with their existing methodologies and helping them work through new opportunities as well. But I'm curious, perhaps on a bit of a personal note, at what point in your career did you realize that sales was your thing, so to speak?
When I was 16 or 17.
Wow, okay.
And even though I went to college, marketing and psychology were my majors, and I came out and went back into sales. So a lot of money I could have saved.
So at 16 or 17, what was the nature of your sales experience?
Door-to-door, vacuum cleaners,
Right.
aluminum siding over the phone, and you can think of it as generally business development. Anything in terms of bringing on money and selling. It was just something with people from the New York market. They had to have it in their fiber. And
Brilliant.
Doesn't matter how much school you go to, you come back to it.
And given your journey to date, what would you say is your personal area of strength?
In relating to sales or business development, it's intuition. So I can intuitively, it sounds a little superficial, but I can intuitively look and see opportunity and manipulate it, let's say. And that's actually the reason for the book. Of the 40 years of me doing it this way, this prospecting methodology, actually 30, because it took me almost 10 to write the book, I tried to formalize the intuition.
Right.
It's something that some people just have within them, which I relate in the book at some of the methods in terms of gaining allies through the alliance process. You're looking for people who have that within them. And then you can actually score it with metrics.
Interesting. I'd love to unpack that, but in that area of strength that you're talking about, what is something that you would say businesses don't know but should?
When you say don't know, that's a little one step off, but I'll answer it that way. What they don't know is there's a much more productive way to develop business. Okay? And they should know that. Now, they may think they do, but they don't know what it is. So they should know that we should be producing more, but then they're stuck. And then they go back to the retreaded ways that have been around for 40 years. The only difference now is they're automated. So IT has taken over the dumb methods, let's put it that way. So nothing has really changed except it helps IT companies.
That's an interesting perspective. Would you say that the problem really still stems from the perspectives held by sales leaders, or is there some, if not a fair portion of the issue that is well within the realm of responsibility of salespeople themselves?
Leadership,
Okay.
100%, and that could be sales manager up in terms of leadership, but it's absolutely within the leadership. And part of the issue is, just step back, the whole basis of the way I do things and the book and my philosophy and perspective is the problem with sales in the professional realm is it's a paradox, because I'm going to be very extreme in this explanation. Sales is the most important function within a business. Okay, the actual concept of sales, bringing money on, etc. So it's the most important and quite probably the least respected at the same time. So what happens is things are put into place since the lack of respect, to control that process, which inhibits it. And that becomes a vicious cycle of control and use the basic term babysitting, and trying to manipulate activity and all these other ancillaries where leadership thinks they're managing things, but they're really inhibiting things.
Would you say that really stems from this idea of pursuing hard after revenue targets, or is there more of a historical basis to that?
No, it's not that far down the rabbit hole. It's more basic. I'll give you a simple
Sure.
explanation. And this is really what is the foundation of the issue and how I do things as well. But I'll give you just a really 10-second example. If you asked, and I've done this, if you ask employees within an organization, what's the most important thing in a business? And they'll say sales most of the time. They may say making money, same thing. They mean sales. Now, if you ask the same people, who are the most important employees in the organization, none of them are going to say the salespeople. Okay, so that's the paradigm. That doesn't make sense. And the reason for this, and the reason for the problem with the control, too much control and processes controlling it, is the foundation piece is if leadership starts with a negative view of sales, the sales profession, the people, then all of the strategies and processes are going to be based on control. Okay, managing them because they feel they have to use the term micromanage, but it's a little bit more in depth than that. Now, if leadership starts with a positive view of sales, then it's based on trust. And now you're allowing the sales professional to do what they innately can do, or at least be open to it. And the two things butt heads where processes are killing business development, where if you had trust, and trust is a generic term, but if you allow them to do what they can do or even build off of that, then they're doing what their talent brings to the forefront. And that's the foundation problem. And exactly what I didn't write the book for that reason, but it turned into that viewpoint.
So I believe you have a background in IT development as well. And I'm curious how...
Let me just clarify something. I can take general principles of making things better and apply them to what I know.
Okay.
So in this case, it's different IT tools. I couldn't write code to save my life. I could probably understand it. But you take a CRM database, and now I think I mentioned to you moving into the whole AI piece. That could be an unbelievable game changer in sales if it's implemented properly.
Certainly. But as I understand it, your approach starts with data analytics and the systematic processes. Would that be correct?
Yeah, the data analytics it's a way of me taking what I do intuitively and formalizing it. So I don't want to say the layman, but somebody who doesn't have as much intuition or wants to build it can say, all right, is this right? And you can apply analytics to support what you're doing and cover it.
Yes, certainly.
And I created the equations out of thin air, which it's a combination of my ability. I have ability with statistics, but also my experience in sales and saying, okay, what part of these equations would actually be useful within these situations? And then somebody grabbing the book or even understanding wouldn't need me to be there to say, is this prospecting method working for me? Let me punch the numbers in this equation and see. Now, something as simple as that is foreign to leadership.
Yeah.
It's absolutely foreign.
But again, an interesting point there. So you're developing systems that quite literally help with sales transformation. So if we are to think of it in terms of systems, what critical system design principles do you believe that B2B founders should apply to their sales processes?
I'm not sure in terms of answering by systems, but let me tell you what it should be. And step back again. The most important process in sales is prospecting. Everything is dependent on that, whether anyone believes it or not. Okay, so all the trainings, et cetera, that teach you what to say when you're in front of the customer, it's virtually meaningless because someone has to teach them how to get in front of the customer in the first place. And also, those things you teach are specific to specific pain points, and you're not going to always match that up. So really, 90% of making a sale is the prospecting, and 10% is really just the negotiation. And that's being in front of the customer and thinking on your feet. That's what it comes down to. But the opposite is taught because nobody knows how to teach prospecting. But the systems involved as it relates to this, and this is one of the problems with turnover rates in sales, et cetera, is sales professionals have deadlines, quota, et cetera. So time is the system that you have to manipulate. All right. Now, how do you do that? You have to prospect in a way where you can produce the most in the least amount of time. And that's what my methods do. And just to step back, a lot of what I've done in my career is, it's called consulting work, but it's really independent contractor work. And I'd be hired by an organization to maybe sell a new channel, business develop, and maybe the startups. But I would be on a 3 to 6 month contract. So I had to get in there, learn the product, learn the target customer, hunt them and sell them within that period of time. And if you use typical prospecting methods, it's doomed. You couldn't do it. So that's why I used a lot of these techniques, and I formalized them a little bit, just more than just purely intuition. And to throw a number out, my methods, you've heard the term cold calling, of course, right?
Yep.
Cold calling 100. It's probably at its peak almost 160 times more productive in terms of gaining an appointment. 16,000% more productive if you use the alliance process. But a lot of the time, leadership would rather that sales professionals do it the old-fashioned way, because it makes them look good too. Everyone's banging the phones, or out there hustling and everything, and they look great, but the sales professionals are starving because you can't produce enough that way to hit quota and make money.
Okay. I would agree with you that prospecting is quite important. I'm curious though, given the way technology is, perhaps more traditionally speaking, there was a role for SDRs who would do more of the prospecting work. There seems to be a lot of conversation around doing away with SDRs, given the level of automation and AI that can be used to do a lot of that work. Would you agree with that? Number one. Number two,
yes.
If you do agree with it, is it a case of garbage in, garbage out? Value in, value out?
Yes to both.
Okay.
Here's the, it's not just a yes or no.
Yep.
Okay. SDRs, which earlier would be called telemarketers, let's say, they would be generating the calls. Okay. Now, if I'm a sales professional and I'm getting the leads from an SDR or a telemarketer, that benefits me because I'm not wasting all that upfront time doing the initial calls. I'm just working on the ones that come out that are viable.
Yeah.
And that's a key thing. All right. Now, if you're using SDRs as a sales professional now, then that's just as good as it being automated, because that's not your time being wasted. However, if you're a leader in an organization and 100%, there's no need for that because it can be automated. All right. And this is cold calling now. This isn't my alliance process, because that's completely different. Cold calling is randomization. So you want to hit as many as you can and hope there's a timing of the need for your product and when they're ready to buy and you're ready to sell. So if it's just randomization and raw numbers, you might as well automate it. Right. And then what comes out of that is the positive potential appointments that are left over for the sales professional, and then they start with that number and move forward. As an example, and a lot of times sales professionals have to do their own hunting, their own prospecting. If they have to make all these calls also, then they're putting in all that time, they gain an appointment, and then they have to go on that appointment, which takes up the time to do it the next day, etc. Although that still exists, which is part of the problem. So absolutely, it can be automated. To be done. It should be automated, actually, and especially I've used some AI tools that do that, and they're fantastic. Okay, there's been in the past actual training manuals in organizations I worked for where it's said in there as part of what you're supposed to learn that to get more appointments, you just make more calls. It doesn't take, and it actually said it doesn't take any more talent or intelligence. It's just a matter of picking up the phone more often, and it's not. Because you're limited. If it takes me all day to make 100 calls to get a 1% success rate, one appointment, I can't make more that day to increase the ratio. And that's also just another point about prospecting. And I make that clear in the book and when I teach. All prospecting methods work. It's not the issue whether or not they work. The issue is how often they work. It's the rate of success. And that's what can... Like I said, the survival guide is financial survival. Now, if you're controlling me as a leader and saying, I need you to make 100 calls a day, you're doomed because you'll never produce enough. And then the vicious cycle starts in the sales profession of the CRM, managing the CRM, putting your activity in, turning over the sales professional, and then the next person who takes your spot has all that neat new data to use to start their prospecting.
So if randomization, as you put it, doesn't really work, talk to us, if you would, about this alliance process that takes people down a bit of a different path.
The difference is that just basically the alliance, the process itself, tactical prospecting is the foundation. And what that means is that instead of hunting for businesses, you're trying to identify people with, like I said, a business development mindset. That's more explained in depth. But basically, you've run into people with a business development mindset in your daily life. People who just have the ability to identify and negotiate and handle opportunities. They may even give them to you as references or referrals. It's in their nature. Okay, and that's something that can be categorized and measured. Now, that is the foundation. The next level is the alliance process, which you take these contacts that you identify and you form lead generating relationships with them. And that's the alliance process. So you decide through the equations that these people are good business development contacts. They have a good mindset. Now, what type of alliance partner are they? And there's 5 categories for them. And you determine, according to certain metrics, which one they go in. And that helps you determine how to interact with them to generate leads. And they're allies forever. Doesn't matter where you go, what industry, because the key thing is having a business development mindset as a connection. Because now, I'll give you an example. If I started or anyone starts a new sales position and they say, okay, go prospect, they'll hand you a list of 100 potential target businesses that could buy the product. And you'll make 100 calls. It's all random because they're cold as well. And maybe you'll get 1 or 2 appointments out of it. So you can spend the whole day, it'll probably more, and get 2 appointments. But now, instead, if I call people I know, let's assume I call 3 or 4 people who are allies. They may be an IT consultant. They're certainly in business in some way. You're getting access to the contacts and leads in their brain, which is exponential. So you say, I'm selling this product now. What do you think? And they will think of people or potential businesses that can use the product. So instead of me spending 8 hours to get 1 appointment, I spend a half an hour and I can get 10, 15 appointments. And that's the whole thing. Instead of randomization, you want to get access to the contacts in an ally's brain. That's the big difference. And it's an example I've used where I've worked with other sales professionals, and there was one in particular who was really having a tough time. He was there for 3 months, couldn't get a single appointment, and he wasn't sure if he was going to be fired. And I said, look, let me just make an extreme example to show you what you should be doing. I said, if the manager walked in today and said to you this morning, you have 30 minutes to get 1 appointment or you're fired. Okay, that's the scenario. What would you do? Would you send out emails? Would you call? I said, no. You would call people just as a general, like I said, human nature of a business development person. And that's basically what it is. It's more detailed, but you're calling people who have access to contacts that they can get you into in a higher closing ratio type of scenario. And it comes down to, you've heard the term networking.
Yeah.
It's networking on steroids because familiarity breeds comfort. And they're handing you leads that are able to buy, want the product, and are already vouched for you because they were handed to you by somebody they know. And it makes all the difference in the world.
The question that comes to mind is, let's say you reach out to someone you know who then refers you to a potential client or potential partner down the track. While your intent is to sell, how are you trying to bring these people alongside and build trust with them so that you can have that long-term relationship?
When you prospect the normal way, not the normal way, the typical way, excuse me, you inherit about a dozen obstacles. And part of it is trust, getting by the gatekeeper, and you've heard them all right? However, when you do it through the alliance process, all of that is eliminated because you're vouched for by the reference. They want to see you because they know about your product through the reference and want the product.
Okay.
They're able to buy. The only trust aspect is with the product. They trust you, they trust the organization because you've been vouched for, and they're ready, willing, and able to buy. The only trust piece is you got to deliver. You got to be able to do what you say. And like I said, that's kind of like the negotiating the 10% piece. So a lot of all those typical obstacles are eliminated when you use the alliance process because you're vouched for, among other things.
Okay.
So trust isn't an issue.
So if you're using the alliance process,
Right.
what would be, I guess, a better metric to gauge your overall productivity in terms of prospecting?
Is the appointment ratio, I'll call it the success rate, the ability to, let me step back, the time it takes to gain an appointment, and then the closing ratio of that appointment. Those are the key ones. There's others, but those are the key ones. I'll throw two numbers at you, and you don't have to understand what the metrics are. It's just showing the power of it. Cold calling, and this is some of the basic equations in the book. I measure things by what am I accomplishing within 1 hour of prospecting, because that's all that matters to me. I can tell within an hour whether something I'm doing is productive or not. Now, not necessarily gain the appointment, but I can see if it's moving in the right direction. Because if it isn't, I have to change things up. I can't waste 2 or 3 months, which is done. So the equation is the amount of time to gain one appointment. So with cold calling, it's one appointment per 8 hours, which comes to a metric of 0.125. Now that sales closing ratio of that type of appointment from cold calling is 10%. So it comes to times 10%. The metric for cold calling is 0.0125. All right, just keep that on the left side. My metric is the sales closing ratio of the alliance process is 1.99. Let's say 2.0. So that's where you get the 160 times more productive, because I can gain an appointment within a third of an hour this way on average, and it has a 65% closing ratio. So those are the metrics I move. It's like, how much am I producing within 1 hour of, I'll say work, but prospecting. And that's the main metric. It's funny you bring up AI. One of the things I'm working on with IT organization is, which is sorely needed, is I've told you about some of the drawbacks in leadership. Taking the metrics plus taking some of the, or you can take the methods and use it as if this then, if your numbers are good or bad, then do this, and creating an AI sales manager that could be carried around in a sales professional's phone. So this way it's, okay, what's the prospecting method? Here are some of the basics. It'll tell you what the metric is and then tell you how to overcome that metric by changing up. And this way you don't have to deal with the leadership that's just making a living off of you knocking on doors. I think it would be cool, actually, because I get tired of hearing, the typical rigmarole from managers. I'd rather just talk to a bot.
Yeah, no, that's a great insight. Thank you for that. The way you described the alliance sales process, really interesting. And I'm curious if there's more required to help convince senior leadership in an organization to buy into your way of thinking, and if so, what would those other elements be?
It depends on, we say leadership, it depends on what level. And this is from my experience. I'm just going to throw some titles out. A sales manager up to, let's say, VP of sales maybe be interested, but that's pretty much not interested in hearing anything different. Okay? You go above that, EVP higher, they're intrigued. And it's an interesting kind of target market for the book where, and I've done this because when I've done consulting, you get the advantage of being able to sit in front of the CEO right out of the gate because you're not a typical employee, you're being hired out. But who needs this is the C-level, EVP or higher, high-level executives, or the entry level who is actually going to colleges where they have sales professionals, because they both have the same problem. They want to know what the heck is going on in their sales world, and they're not getting the correct information. Whether you're getting it from the classroom or trainer, or you're getting it from some of your subordinates at a C level. And I've sat across tables with C-level executives and told them, because when you're a consultant, it's a little bit more, you can be a little bit more objective, rather subjective, and open up. So they're a little bit more open to, actually a lot more open to hearing different perspectives, because they've been hearing the same crap forever. And where turnover becomes either the prospecting method or the solution to bad sales. And it shouldn't be. So they will be open to it. The problem is, and this is I've always run into, 100% on board, let's get this thing going, and then they hand me off to a subordinate who doesn't want to hear a word of it for 6 months of my contract. So the difference here is creating, and this is one of the reasons too, creating the analytics is very helpful, because EVPs and higher, they're dying to see some of the cost-effective aspects of their sales. And this is what breaks it down. Instead of just looking at the raw numbers and the revenue coming in and how many appointments did you make and how many calls did you make, this is the breakdown of, if you have your sales team prospecting in this way, here's the cost to it. And I have equations that show that as well. Now, if you do it a different way, this will be, and it's funny, the cold calling, just as I showed you the other metric, a cold calling is roughly $3,040 per appointment, per hour rather, of work. Whereas my way, it's 12 for prospecting. Now, if I sit in front of a CEO, they're going to look at this and say, either you're full of it or tell me more. I got to see why. And a lot of CEOs I've sat in front of, I've gotten feedback that he's opened my eyes. And one, actually, we were sitting across a coffee table, and he said he had problems and he wasn't sure what to do. And I said, just describe basically what you think the problem is. And he gave me like a 10-second overview, and I told him what I thought. And he slapped the coffee table with his hand, saying, that's what I've been saying, but nobody's been listening to me.
So with the sales methodology that you prescribe, does it require a significant disruption to existing revenue, or is it something that you begin to implement on a small scale and then branch out, so to speak?
No, it's like flipping a switch.
Okay.
It really is. Of course, getting a little better at it. But the disruption in revenue is a positive disruption.
And in terms of automation in your new process, could you give us the broad strokes of how you would envision this being automated, and at what point do we come in with face-to-face or personalized contact?
The automation process is, and this has been mapped out with an algorithm already. Unfortunately, I had to put it on hold because it was right around COVID. And it is dependent on people getting out and meeting each other. So thank God I didn't invest in it at that time. But it's all, you have a person you're looking for. This is very general terms, but you're looking for somebody with a business development mindset. And a lot of it is having complementary needs to what you're selling and the industry you're selling into. So just to give you an idea, if I meet somebody new, and this would be app-based, just to give you an example. If I meet somebody new, they can have a bar graph on the back of an e-version of a business card. Within that bar graph is all the data that's required in terms of who they work for, what their target customer is, what mine is. We match them up and automatically scans each other's contact database within the smartphone or within their database. And then it links it up. I hate this term, but somebody threw it out once, an IT person. It's like a dating app for businesses. But it's a little bit more involved. So what it'll do is it'll match it up by best, not as best, least best, all the way down the line. But the next thing it does is it'll show you who's the perfect match. And then it can also, since it's a communication device, it can also reach out and make the initial introduction. So it'll do everything. And because that's basically, again, automating what I've done intuitively for 40 years. And that would be the way to do it.
Certainly, sorry, just to clarify, is this an existing platform or a few solutions you've
No, it's in
together?
the works, because it was being built, and I had to put it on hold because when COVID came, like I said, it depends on people meeting each other.
Okay.
So I turned and finished the book at that point,
Uh,
come out with it.
so at the moment, though, it's more of a manual process.
Yeah, you can think of it that way. However, it's not more manual than cold calling or the typical prospecting methods. Yeah, I make the comparison, the analogy. It's if you wanted to get healthy, cold calling is like popping vitamins. Makes you feel good. It may work, may not work. Whereas this is weightlifting. Now it's going to take some effort, but you will see fast gains and real gains. And then what happens, the beauty of it is that it becomes a self-perpetuating type of process. They always, in the book, I show that, like I said, time is the key element. I said, with the alliance process, you can end up with a virtual net zero output of time. And you're thinking, how can it be net zero? You have some time. It's because the leads are being brought to you by the allies, just as you're bringing them because you're somebody else's ally as well. And that's what happened. I have an interesting story. I have a lot of anecdotes in there to back up what I said. It was the end of one day at an organization, and a colleague of mine came into my office, and he had his arms triumphantly in the air and said, I made 74 phone calls today and got 2 appointments. And I looked at him and said, I got 2 appointments today. I didn't make any phone calls. And it was the truth.
With prospecting, let's assume that it's a person who's brand new to the industry. Would you still suggest they go about reaching out to those that they know to build out their network? Or would you also recommend that they insert themselves into places where they could make connections with partners who are probably more connected to potential clients?
Do you mean like distributors as partners or just other people?
Just other people, depending upon their industry. So let's say someone who's perhaps
Yeah.
worked in HVAC, now in IT sales.
I have in there, if you were starting out in sales and had a blank slate, didn't know a human being, which is crazy, but I have a 7-step process is how you would start with this. And it's basically similar to what you say. You would look for a complementary industry, then a complementary organization, then a person, a complementary, mutual beneficial type of person within that organization. You'd communicate and you'd meet with them and work out. Let's assume there's a bunch of mechanisms, but let's say a lead exchange mechanism is one of them, where we're both calling on the same decision maker. It doesn't have to be the same industry, but it's the same decision maker. So let's see how we can help each other. And I've done that so many times that when I'm doing it, it drives me crazy that leadership won't pick up and run with this. Because they'll still say, how many doors did you knock on today? And it's interesting because, especially now with everything IT, and I'm talking this, everything. I could be selling something like office equipment or copiers, and they could be selling laptops. And the same decision maker buys them, makes the final decision because they're both IT based. So we can work out how we can get in. Maybe you have an account already and I can get in there or vice versa. And I can't tell how many times we'd be sitting in Starbucks and across the table and he'd have his CRM open and I have mine. And he'd say, I'm trying to get into Equifax or I'm trying to get into IBM. And I'll look in my CRM and say, okay, here's the new decision maker. That one you have is no longer there, that type of thing. And then we'd help each other out.
Okay.
And then you'd work it because they may already have the account and they'd be able to get me in and vice versa. That's one of the methods, the 7th step, and it's called anchor seeding and counterweighing. And what it is, once I establish a relationship with an ally, I anchor seed the relationship, meaning I give them a lead first that can help them because that does 2 things. It cements the relationship, but also it's a monitoring tool to see, are they going to counterweigh and offer me in kind? Because if they're not, like I said, most important thing is your time. If they're not, then you don't deal with it going forward. And that's one of the things to determine.
Very interesting. So does the relationship with your alliance partners need more of a nurturing component to it, or is it just fine to catch up with people and talk about lead exchanges?
It's not necessarily nurturing. There's 5 categories of allies, and determining on their mindset strength, that's the one you put them in. And what it is, instead of nurturing, it's more of you're treating them the same way you would treat making a sale. And a tough customer or a bigger one, you would treat differently than one that's a laydown. And it's the same thing. If the first one is a passive ally and they have the weakest mindset, so they're only good for one shot, but you keep them in your mind. Okay, so I'm dealing with them different than a partner ally, which is the strongest as a human being, not a business, where I could just say, listen, I'm selling widgets now. What do you think? And they'll hit me with 5, 6, 7, just like I'd be the same, potential customers who could use it. And a lot of the time when you're talking to them, they'll actually make the phone calls for you. They'll walk you in, they're selling. So it's a matter of how you deal with them. You use the same techniques you use in selling as you do with if I have a passive ally and I keep trying to get leads out of them, forget it. It'll die on the vine because they don't have a strong enough mindset for that.
Brilliant.
I call it in the book, they're a one-shot deal.
Okay.
But sometimes it's like I deal with them, I interact, but it could take 2 or 3 or 4 years before the product you're selling matches what they have.
Right.
And then,
with the process that you've been outlining, I would think not only does senior leadership need to buy into it, it could or should essentially affect the way you hire and train your sales teams as well. And what skills would senior executives now, or should they be looking for in new hires to get this new culture and way of thinking?
the most important thing, and maybe a little tough because there's different degrees of it, is the business development mindset within the sales profession.
Right.
Because what there's a tendency to forget in the profession is that we're here to do business, to do deals. Okay, so you want people who are thinking to do business. I'm talking about salespeople. Somehow it became a human behavioral specialty, where it's all about Pavlovian dogs with motivation and keywords. And I always tell the funny story, that I came in from the field once at an organization, and I was going over to my cubicle, and there was almost a life-size inflatable monkey hanging on the corner of the cubicle. And I asked a friend, I said, "What is that?" And they said, "That's a motivational tool. It's like you have a monkey on your back. Until you make a sale, you have a monkey on your back, and then you move it to the next one." I said, "I don't need motivation. I'm on commission." I voluntarily chose this profession. Do you see monkeys in the accounting department or in the inventory department hanging on people's desks? So the difference is we're here to do business and do deals. So you're looking for that in them. The second thing is a level of, I don't know how much it helps, but you can determine these things through the interview process, an ability to think on your feet, okay? Not just recite acronyms, which unfortunately is trained too much, because those are the only two things that matter to be a successful sales professional. If you can prospect, if you're doing it on your own, in this manner, using your business development acumen, and then you can think on your feet for that last 10% of the negotiating within the sales call, then there's nothing that can stop you. They don't want you to do that.
What about the perspective of leadership setting revenue targets? That's a traditional mindset still used today. It's quite important because without revenue, the company dries up and dies. But with using the alliance process, should we have additional sub-metrics in order to ensure that there is a realistic match with the prospecting side as well as the revenue targets?
It's more toward what the sales professional has to work with. But you're 100%. If I'm brand new and I'm up against somebody who's got a 10-year territory, we shouldn't have the same revenue targets. And a lot of the time we don't.
Yeah.
But the other thing, and this is metric-based, which is completely ignored, and it helps, is the sales cycle of the product has to more closely match the revenue period, the quota period. Where most quota periods, the revenue target are monthly. But if I have a 6-month sales cycle, you can't judge my performance because it's going to be crazy. And it's funny that there's a term that's been thrown out to me for years by management where they say you have a sawtooth, which is they'll show me a graph of my sales. And month to month, it may go up and down and up, and it looks like the teeth of a saw. And they'll always say, you had a good month, and then you got lazy. And you didn't do anything the second month. And I said, no, that's not the case. This took up some time to rebuild the pipeline. Now, if you took the numbers, which I've done, and I stretch them across the sales cycle, it looks like bing, like a perfect upward, like all you're doing is growing. And those are the two things. You need some sort of target. There's a third thing which I learned early on, which I would do as in management. I wouldn't necessarily have a revenue target. I would have like a quota. I would have a commitment. Okay. What do you think you're going to do for me this month? Okay. And then because the one who's got 10 years of tenure, you should have a higher commitment to me than this person. And that works wonders more than a quota. Because when you have quota, then you have cheating, you have fudging, you have sandbagging. It's everything you do to manipulate the numbers. You're not left out to dry, like being reprimanded for having a sawtooth. If I knew I was going to get reprimanded, I wouldn't turn all the sales in the first month. I'd wait so it's a little bit more even the second month. But I've never done that, by the way. I think that's dumb. But it's, okay, look at that. It's more even month to month. I'm a good salesperson. I said, that's no different. Why don't you look at me after 6 months and add it all up? That's one of the key things that always threw me and hasn't changed, that they don't, I understand why you would have it monthly, but they don't match it more closely to the sales cycle of the product, the quota period.
Yeah.
Because it's more telling.
With this idea of transforming sales teams through systematic revenue scaling, do you find that there's perhaps a couple of areas that don't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
In terms of revenue?
Yeah, in terms of transforming sales teams through systematic revenue scaling.
Oh, the prospecting piece.
Okay.
100%.
Okay.
Everything in training, like I said, they'll start with you sitting in front of the customer. Now, they may touch upon the prospecting piece because they have to, but they skate over it so fast. It's almost like they took it from another book, read it off to you, and then got to the other stuff, because that's what they're more comfortable with. The prospecting piece is the most important piece in sales, and it is the least understood, the least taught, and the most damaging. You say it and this is another metric I have in the book. I told you that figure, 0.125. Let's just say it's 1% success rate. I have that you should only use the prospecting methods the amount of time equal to their success rate. And then that'll tell you exactly what to do. So if you're telling me to do something that only succeeds 1% of the time, and I'm only doing that 1% of the time, then it means like I shouldn't even be focusing on it at all. It's like a byproduct because 1% of the time, and I know this, it's 10 minutes of the month. So you're not going to come up with a strategy to do something 10 minutes of the month. It's going to be, what the hell? I'm standing next to this account. I might as well go knock on the door. I'm going to focus on the 160 times success rate and build it. Now, that may start out with a new rep at only 1% success, but you keep doing it and then it grows into it. And if it doesn't, which isn't the case, you toss it and move on.
Okay, excellent. Now, to wrap up, the book on Amazon and other major retailers, is that correct?
It's mainly through my website, www.MikeLaRusso.com is the best place to get it. And I can be reached through there, through my LinkedIn or email at mike@MikeLaRusso.com. It's the best way to get a hold of me.
Okay, we'll include links to that in the show notes. This has been terrific. Thank you so much for doing this.
I appreciate the time.